The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. Semper Paratus, always prepared. That is the motto and sworn mission of the United States Coast Guard. Unfortunately, insufficient financial support over the years has left the Coast Guard without all of the equipment needed to stay prepared. Facilities are moldy, including needing water.
He loves the Coast Guard. He's very emotional about this.
Amen. Texas has a lot of coast, and we do love our Coast Guardsmen. Facilities are moldy and decrepit. Technology to thwart drug cartels and human traffickers is outdated. The United States has only 3 aging polar icebreakers, whereas China has 4, and Russia has more than 40. Earlier this year, however, our committee and the Trump administration took a momentous step towards changing that. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act made an historic $24.6 billion investment in the Coast Guard. It was the single largest appropriation in Coast Guard history. It includes funds to acquire at least 5 polar icebreakers, 40 helicopters, and 9 patrol cutters. It unleashes $4 billion for improving shore facilities like the boot camp barracks, multi-use training centers, and the Coast Guard Yard. Put simply, it funds the Coast Guard of the future. The Coast Guard needs leadership to implement this investment. It needs a commandant who will reinvigorate efforts to protect and patrol America's waters. That's precisely why I'm so glad that President Trump has nominated Admiral Kevin Lunde. Since January, Admiral Lunde has served as the acting commandant of the Coast Guard. In this role, he has exceptionally managed long overdue surges of Coast Guard resources to the Gulf Coast and the Pacific to interdict drug runners and human traffickers, while also balancing the service's many other directives. In fiscal year 2025 alone, the Coast Guard seized nearly 510,000 pounds of cocaine, by far the largest haul in its history and 3 times its annual average. That's the equivalent of 193 million lethal doses, more than enough to poison half of the United States population. Just since August, the Coast Guard's newly launched Pacific Viper has netted 100,000 pounds. These results show that the Coast Guard is dismantling narco-terrorist networks before they even reach American shores. As Admiral Lunde has put it, we own the sea. Along with partner agencies, the service is better securing our border. It recently launched Operation Riverwall along the Rio Grande, deploying watercraft and tactical teams to help deter and defeat illegal immigration, smuggling, and other national security threats. I have every confidence that this good work will continue under Admiral Lunde. A graduate of the Coast Guard Academy, he has served his country for close to 4 decades, leading the Coast Guard's Cyber Command, Oceania District, and the entire Atlantic area, including all U.S. waterways east of the Rocky Mountains. Now, I look forward to his leadership of the Coast Guard as Commandant. And I recognize Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Lunde, congratulations on your nomination to serve as the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. If confirmed, you will continue to lead a force of 41,000 active duty and 7,000 reserve and nearly 10,000 civilian employees as they fulfill this core mission of service, providing maritime security, law enforcement, fisheries enforcement, ice-breaking capacity, and prevention and response activities for the largest system of ports, waterways, and coast in the world. For nearly 2.5 centuries, the Coast Guard has answered the call through hurricanes, oil spills, search and rescue missions, and national emergencies. From the icy waters of the Arctic to the ports of Puget Sound, coasties keep America safe, protect our environment, and keep commerce moving. But the Coast Guard is not without its challenges, especially at this moment, and I'll have many questions for you, Admiral Lunde, about how you plan to address those challenges. Unlike your predecessor, you've been serving as acting commandant for nearly 10 months, so you've been in the room, I should say, already making decisions that directly impact the Coast Guard's future. First, I have serious concerns about whether the Coast Guard is pulling back from its core mission of search and rescue. There are 23 vacant search and rescue stations with 0 permanent staffing or assets. Even more concerning, the Coast Guard informed the committee that there is no plan to reopen these stations, and there are reports of phased plans to shutter even more stations amid rumors about potentially privatizing search and rescue. While none of the current closures impact the state of Washington, our fishermen are impacted when they are crabbing off of Coos Bay or North Bend, Oregon, and they find Coast Guard small boat air rescue stations shuttered. The Dungeness crab industry is one of the most dangerous fisheries in the nation, and they rely on the Coast Guard. Admiral Lunde, I expect you to provide clarity on that issue. I also expect you to address morale issues I'm hearing at the service. We need to make sure that in the backdrop of the firing of Commandant Admiral Lunde 18 months before the end of her Senate confirmed term. That's never happened. Days later, Admiral Fagan was evicted from her home. And at the same time, I think this is an appalling way to treat a top military officer who served the country with distinction. And it's not a responsible way to government. It sends a clear message throughout the ranks that professional independence can be overridden by political preferences. Meanwhile, there are still serious questions about resources. Last month, the Coast Guard purchased 2 luxury executive aircraft for more than $172 million, using funds intended for those search and rescue missions, particularly the C-130s. So Admiral Lunde, I expect to ask about that particular issue this morning as well. The Coast Guard plays an important role in assessing impacts like the I-5 bridge and what impact it would have on military and maritime traffic, and completing a preliminary assessment is necessary for the Department of Transportation to finish its environmental review. So I expect the Coast Guard to complete that assessment promptly so we can get closer to replacing this bridge that's 108 years old. I also expect the Coast Guard to address the urgent issues at Station Cape Disappointment, a critical Coast Guard unit in the Pacific Northwest and vital training for our coastal surfmen. These includes emergency damage and shoaling that has occurred at the base. We need a comprehensive strategy to invest in Cape Disappointment to ensure that it can continue to do its search and rescue mission. And I would like to return to the operation of fouled anchor. The Coast Guard's decades-long mishandling of the sexual conduct cases at the Coast Guard Academy. As chair of this committee, I worked with Senators Baldwin and Cruz and Sullivan to initiate a DHS Inspector General investigation into the Coast Guard cover-up. It's been 2 years, and I'm still waiting for the results. I expect the Inspector General to finish this work without delay and for the Coast Guard to fully cooperate with the investigation. Rest assured that we will continue to hold the Coast Guard accountable on these issues. The committee worked together to draft common sense legislation, and the Senate's Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2025 would expand Coast Guard authorities and programs to hold perpetrators accountable, enhance investigations, and the legal process to improve victim recovery services and access to all, including the boosting of training. So I'll look forward to hearing about how we improve the accountability there, Admiral, and your leadership on that particular issue. Again, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. I would now recognize our friend and colleague from the great state of South Carolina, to Senator Graham, and I would note that I expect you to get as choked up and emotional about the Coast Guard as I did.
Well, I'm very excited about the Coast Guard. We have a plan, apparently, to move the entire Coast Guard to South Carolina, and I want to
Your time has expired.
I don't think that probably helps you here, but the reason I'm here is I've known Admiral Lunde for a while, and he's born in Columbia, South Carolina. And to both of you, Chair and Ranking Member, I appreciate acknowledging the role the Coast Guard plays. It's the mighty, mighty Coast Guard, and we're at the Commerce Committee, and without the Coast Guard, we'd be less safe and less prosperous. Admiral Lunde and his lovely wife, Linda Lee, are here. They've dedicated 39 years of service to the United States Coast Guard. He's a graduate of the U.S. Coast Guard Academy with honors, the National War College, the Naval War College, and George Washington University Law School. One thing I want to highlight, he's the first judge advocate in the history of the Coast Guard to be Commandant. I think now's a good time for that expertise. I served as a judge advocate in the Air Force, and his experience, he's a cyber security expert. He's commanded forces all over the world in the Coast Guard. He's been the Commandant for the last 10 months. These are dangerous times in which we all live. I think he's got the expertise, the academic background, and the character and the judgment to continue to lead the Coast Guard. I would urge you to continue making him the Commandant. I think he's earned that distinction. His record is unblemished. He understands the men and women in the Coast Guard because he has lived his life in their ranks. He has been all over the world in the service of our nation, and I just can't recommend him to you more highly. We're proud of the fact that he started his life in South Carolina, and he's risen the ranks as a judge advocate all the way to the top. And that is something to be proud of. So I wish you and your wife all the best. And I know that if you're the Commandant of the Coast Guard, continuing that role, America will be safe and prosperous. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Now recognize Admiral Lunde for his opening statement.
Senator Graham, thank you very much for the introduction, sir. Good morning, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Member Blunt-Rochester, distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before you here today. I'm thankful to President Trump and Secretary Noem for their trust and confidence to nominate me as the next Commandant of the Coast Guard, subject to the Senate's confirmation. And I thank the committee for your enduring support for our service. If confirmed, I look forward to working closely with the committee and with the rest of Congress. I also want to thank the team that helped prepare me for today. The most important part of that team is right here with me today, my wife, Lunday. I am blessed by our 36 years of marriage and her enduring love and support that has enabled me to continue to serve an active career in the United States Coast Guard. She's a proud military spouse and a champion for Coast Guard and Joint Force family readiness. Across the many dynamic challenges of Coast Guard life, she's also maintained her own professional career as a gifted speech-language pathologist. She is remarkable, and I would not be here today without her. I'm from a family of military service. My dad was a career Army soldier of infantry and special forces who rose from private to colonel. He fought in Vietnam and the Cold War and commanded troops in combat and crisis. My mom was an officer in the Army Medical Corps before becoming a full-time mom and military spouse to raise 3 sons. My parents taught me my values and instilled in me my faith in God. They set the example that's guided me throughout my life and inspired me to join the armed forces. Now, I joined the Coast Guard because I wanted to fight the spread of communism in the Soviet Union, to stop drug smugglers at sea, and to save lives. I was drawn to the service's proud history of fighting in every one of our nation's wars. Over the past nearly 39 years, I've served with Cruz and led them throughout the Atlantic and Pacific regions and in cyberspace. Now, while the missions have been rewarding, I've found the most joy serving as part of a Coast Guard crew, alongside men and women who share the same values as me and who are, without question, the very best in the world at what they do. I'm fiercely proud to serve with them and inspired every day by their unwavering dedication and courage. Today, as threats and challenges facing our nation grow, I believe the American people need a stronger and more capable Coast Guard today more than ever. For the past 10 months as the acting Commandant, I've led the Coast Guard to achieve full operational control of our border by controlling, securing, and defending our border and maritime approaches, to facilitate commerce that's vital to our economic prosperity and strategic mobility by ensuring the safety and security of that commerce in physical and in cyberspace. And third, by ensuring the Coast Guard is ready to respond to a crisis or contingency that comes with little or no warning. And I prioritize taking care of our people, our most precious resource, because the service readiness starts with the readiness of every Coast Guard man and woman and their families. And to that end, we've continued to work hard to improve access to quality health care and housing and child care, and strengthened our ombudsman program. At the same time, I led the early implementation of one of the most sweeping transformation and modernization efforts for the Coast Guard in the last century. The Secretary of Homeland Security has directed me to transform the Coast Guard into a more agile, responsive, and capable fighting force through Force Design 2028. This bold plan drives rapid innovation, delivers new capabilities at speed and scale, and grows the Coast Guard by 15,000 military personnel. This transformation is coupled with a historic capital investment of $24.6 billion through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that will rapidly deliver new cutters, boats, aircraft, shore infrastructure, and technology. This down payment is the first step to ensure the Coast Guard remains always ready. If confirmed, I'll lead the service forward under the direction of the Secretary and the President, and with the strong support of Congress to ensure we continue to deliver the best value to the American people. I'm filled with hope for the future of our Coast Guard because no matter the challenges ahead, we will prevail. If there's one thing I know, and our service history proves, with a ready Coast Guard crew and the strong support of the American people, there is nothing we can't accomplish. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. After years of neglect, the Coast Guard is finally receiving the resources it needs to stop illegal immigration, to intercept drug traffickers, and to keep Americans safe at sea. Senate Republicans fought hard to secure nearly $25 billion for the Coast Guard in the One Big Beautiful Bill to fund the largest recapitalization of the Coast Guard in history. In your judgment, how big a deal is that investment in the Coast Guard?
Mr. Chairman, it is not only a historic investment, but it comes at a time where the Coast Guard was facing decades of underinvestment that resulted in a readiness spiral for us. And so this infusion of capital investment will enable us to recapitalize in the areas I just described. And that, coupled with higher sustained annual authorization and appropriations, particularly the operating funds necessary to, for example, bring on those 15,000 Coast Guard men and women, are going to enable us to be successful into the future.
I very much agree. Another element of the One Big Beautiful Bill is that we cut through layers of red tape and we gave the Coast Guard flexibility to quickly buy new ships and aircraft. This will help you address urgent readiness gaps before the funding window closes and adversaries get ahead of the U.S. In your judgment, how would backtracking and reinstating those acquisition hurdles impact the Coast Guard's ability to deliver the paid-for assets on time and on budget?
Mr. Chairman, the relief provided in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act from the regular pre-acquisition requirements in Title 14, Chapter 11, is essential for our ability to move at speed and scale to deliver the assets the Coast Guard in America needs. And so if that were to be pulled back, that would slow us down. Those requirements are originally probably intended to reduce risk, but they've resulted in delays in our ability to not move at the pace America needs us to move. And so a permanent change that allows us to not be bound by those that slow us down so we can continue to deliver at speed is vital.
Thank you. Earlier this month at Coast Guard Base Alameda, we saw what happens when anti-enforcement activism gets out of hand. During a protest by the radical left against immigration enforcement, a driver attempted to ram a truck into Coast Guard personnel. Meanwhile, the left has continued to vilify law enforcement and Homeland Security personnel simply for doing their jobs. Admiral Lunde, what message does it send to your service members when acts of aggression like this are met with political indifference?
Mr. Chairman, the safety of our Coast Guard men and women and the safety of the public is our paramount concern. In that situation, our Coast Guard men and women who were standing security were faced with an imminent threat as the driver of that truck reversed and accelerated toward them. It presented a deadly force situation. From all accounts that I know of and can see, they acted with discipline and professionalism to defend themselves and also to protect the public. The driver of that truck, there's an ongoing FBI investigation. The driver's been charged with a federal crime, but our personnel acted with discipline and restraint in that situation.
Turning to a different topic, Iran has used maritime drug trafficking in the Middle East, including trafficking drugs on fishing dhows, to finance its malign activities. I know that you are operating under the command of the Navy, but is it fair to say if the Coast Guard discovers illegal narcotics aboard a vessel in this region, these would-be drug traffickers face no punishment other than having their drugs seized?
Mr. Chairman, under the current practice under the Department of War, that is the outcome. We seize and destroy the drugs, but we do not seize the vessel.
And it's my understanding that the fishermen aboard face no legal punishment. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, in almost all cases.
And the fishermen take control of the dhow and are allowed to continue sailing after the interdiction.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You will not be surprised to know that I think that makes no sense whatsoever, and I very much hope the Department of War changes the protocols in those circumstances. Shifting to another topic. For too long, the Coast Guard has watched from the sidelines as Russia and China have expanded their Arctic operations with fleets of heavy icebreakers. That's why the One Big Beautiful Bill helped fund a modern icebreaking fleet. My understanding is that the Coast Guard is writing a plan, as directed by a presidential memorandum, to phase construction of the Arctic security cutters and eventually transition production to U.S. shipyards, including in the great state of Texas. What are some of the critical debates you are having about that plan, and when will it be made public?
Mr. Chairman, we're continuing to work on delivering that plan that we owe back to the President within 60 days of his October announcement. Our principal focus on that plan is to deliver an onshoring strategy. So the President determined that 4 of those Arctic security cutters would be built first overseas as part of the 2 consortiums, but then we would onshore that capability back into U.S. shipyards. That strengthens our U.S. shipbuilding industrial base, and the remaining Arctic security cutters will be built here in the U.S. by American workers.
That is enormously important capacity, and I think it's going to have profound and long-term effect. All right, final question. How do you expect the Coast Guard to take full advantage of these new Arctic security cutters to support U.S. presence and interest in the Arctic? Put another way, how will things be different for the Coast Guard in the Arctic?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you know, the Coast Guard operates the only U.S. surface presence that accesses both of the polar regions. But particular to the Arctic, that will give us the ability to have sustained presence to challenge adversary behavior. You know, this summer we saw 5 Chinese-flagged research vessels that were operating north along our northern border, north of Alaska, along our extended outer continental shelf area. We sent the older medium icebreaker Healy up there and the new commercial icebreaker Storis that we just commissioned in August, and we ran them out of there. But we need stronger, sustained Coast Guard presence to be able to enforce U.S. sovereignty, protect our border and our maritime approaches throughout the Arctic Ocean.
I very much agree. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, congratulations on your nomination, and I'm going to take you to some colder places, as Senator Cruz left off with that. The Port of Duluth, have you been there before?
Senator, I have not been to the Port of Duluth, but I look forward to visiting.
Excellent answer. It is, in fact, the largest port by tonnage on the Great Lakes, 35 million tons of cargo, one of the nation's top 20 ports. We're very proud of it. Over the years, we've put a lot of funding into making it multimodal, and there's all kinds of things shipped back and forth. And that Senator Baldwin and I, as a result of her work on the Great Lakes, have been really focused on the acquisition of a second Coast Guard Great Lakes icebreaker to be used on the Great Lakes and the port. Do you have the resources you need, and can you talk about the importance of icebreakers?
Senator, thank you. The Great Lakes, as you know, is a critical system to our national economy and also our national security. And so the Coast Guard operates the Mackinac, which is the current Great Lakes icebreaker, and we need a second Great Lakes icebreaker. I want to thank the support of Congress in FY24 budget for appropriating $20 million to continue the pre-acquisition, the analyze and select phase for the next Great Lakes icebreaker. But we need an additional $35 million to complete that analyze and select phase and move toward that acquisition. I just released our FY26 unfunded priorities list, and that includes a request for that additional funding on the unfunded priorities list.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And we hope we can get this done. It's just so important for the future of the economy. One of these supply chain issues, I know you've worked on supply chains, and what are some of the biggest challenges the Coast Guard is facing when trying to manage shipping vessels when there is congestion, as opposed to the icebreaker issue?
Well, Senator, one of the biggest challenges that we face is we have to keep the commerce moving. And while we keep it moving, we also have to make sure that it is safe and secure through our entire marine transportation system. So that's our ports, our inland waterways as well, and of course the Great Lakes system. And so we also license U.S. mariners, which is critically important to make sure that our mariners have the training and capability to be able to operate what will be a growing U.S. fleet under the President's direction to restore America's maritime dominance. All of that falls under the Coast Guard's authority and responsibility.
Thank you. And you pledge to coordinate with our very friendly neighbor to the north, Canada, which is near and dear to my heart.
Senator, we do. The Coast Guard has a strong operational relationship with Canadian forces, whether it's Royal Canadian Mounted Police or Canadian Defense. And that's a strong working relationship across our northern border and into the Arctic. You know, yesterday I was with Secretary Nome at the icebreaker collaboration effort meeting that she chaired with representatives of Canada and Finland. And she talked about the importance of our partnership with not only Canada, but also Finland. And it's just another example of that close working relationship, Senator.
Yes, Senator Mikowski and I are meeting with members of the Finnish Parliament today about just this same subject. So the Edmund Fitzgerald, we just recognized the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, loss of 29 crew members, transporting taconite from Minnesota's Iron Range, where my dad grew up. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. It wasn't just a very famous song that came out of that, but coming out of that was a Coast Guard investigation that led to major changes to Great Lakes shipping practices. You should know in freezing cold weather, 2,000 Minnesotans gathered outside on the North Shore just last week to recognize those that we lost, including some of their descendants' family members. In your testimony, you mentioned the Coast Guard's role in responding to crises that come without warning. Just to confirm that you will continue to prioritize that. We lost a Coast Guard station in Grand Marais. We have now worked with the tribe up there and gotten some funding to have a tribal Coast Guard, because if the Coast Guard comes from Duluth, it's such a long way up the North Shore. It's worth looking into what they've resorted to, but we do have some ships, some boats that can rescue people that the state and the tribe worked on together. But just in general, if you could look into that and how we're kind of band-aiding it together, and then also just a commitment to continue to prioritize safety.
Senator, if confirmed by the Senate, I look forward to working to prioritize safety and also certainly to visit Duluth.
Yeah, well, you will be a very famous celebrity to come to Duluth on to see that port, only because we just love the Coast Guard up there. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Look forward to it.
And Admiral, I will say it's excellent instincts if any member of this committee asks you to visit their state. The only answer is absolutely yes. Senator Wicker.
Admiral, I would suggest you wear layers when you go to Duluth.
Unnecessary.
Admiral Lunde, the experience of serving in the Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps has real benefits. A RAND Corporation study found that students who participated in JROTC have higher grades, better attendance rates, and are more likely to graduate from high school than other students. Mississippi was pleased to welcome the Coast Guard's first JROTC program in the state at Clinton High School in 2023. This is in the Heartland District of the Coast Guard. Let me also note that the Coast Guard is congressionally required to have a JROTC unit in every district by December 31st of this year. In the 2025, in 2025, the Senate passed the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act and included a negotiated provision directing you to expand JROTC to no fewer than 20 programs by the end of 2026. There are currently 14 programs. It shouldn't be too difficult for you to get from 14 programs to 20 programs by the end of next year. Would you comment about that?
Thank you, Senator Wicker. The junior ROTC programs are great programs, and I know the one in Clinton Clinton High School is one of our largest, with the greatest participation of many others. I'm proud to tell you that we are ahead of schedule in establishing a Coast Guard junior ROTC program in every one of the Coast Guard districts. And if confirmed by the Senate, I will work to complete the requirement by the end of 2026, as you described, Senator.
That's good to hear. It is a citizenship builder for sure. Now let's move then to IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. It's a real problem. Admiral Paparo has commended the Coast Guard for its service in his area of the world in that regard. Do you believe the Coast Guard is serving U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific by combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing?
Thank you, Senator. I do. And this is a topic I've actually talked personally with Admiral Paparo about. Combating IUU fishing is not just one of our statutory missions. It's actually a national security imperative, particularly pushing back against the malign influence of China and their distant water fleets. You know, throughout the Indo-Pacific, we see those fleets encroaching on Pacific Island nations and who don't always have the capability to push back, or even on the high seas, violating international rules about illegal fishing. And so the Coast Guard's presence in the Indo-Pacific to enforce not only our sovereignty, because beyond Hawaii and our 3 territories and their exclusive economic zones, there are broad other areas of U.S. sovereignty, exclusive economic zones around small atolls and islands throughout South and Central Pacific, and we are responsible for protecting our sovereignty. We also help Pacific Island nations who don't have the capability through our shipwrighter agreements. So yes, sir, it's of critical importance.
It's a more than $2.4 billion problem for the United States alone in IUU fishing. And yes, it is more than an economic problem. It involves human trafficking, forced labor, and undercutting a very vital industry in the United States. Finally, let me ask you this. It's a bit of good news that Amtrak has opened the Mardi Gras service between New Orleans, going across the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and on to Mobile. It's the passenger participation has been through the roof, outstripping every optimistic projection we've had. So it's very good news. One lingering issue concerns CSX's effort to remotely operate several drawbridges in Alabama and Mississippi. This company has invested nearly $60 million in safety and automation upgrades to run a remote pilot during the pandemic. Yet they've been working for the last 5 years for full automation approval from the Coast Guard. If confirmed, would you be willing to work with me to resolve this issue and ensure the process better supports modern rail infrastructure while maintaining navigational safety?
Senator, I'm aware of the issue, and if confirmed by the Senate, I look forward to working with you to resolve that issue.
I think if we work together, we can get that resolved. The automation is ready, and we need to find a way to yes. So thank you very much for that assurance. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Lunde, thank you for meeting with me in advance of this hearing today, and thank you for your service. When we met, you said that closure of a number of search and rescue facilities across the country is under consideration by the Coast Guard, including at least 3 in Wisconsin. I actually think this would be a reckless decision. Search and rescue is one of the core missions of the Coast Guard, and the people of Wisconsin depend upon the Coast Guard when disaster happens. The Coast Guard's resources in the region are already stretched very thin by the significant commercial and recreational usage of the Great Lakes. Any cuts to the Coast Guard's search and rescue capabilities means that Wisconsinites are going to be less safe on the water. So Admiral Lunde, will you commit today that you will not close facilities in Wisconsin and ensure that there are adequate search and rescue resources on the Great Lakes?
Senator, thank you for the question. Search and rescue is not just one of our 11 missions. It's part of our DNA. It's a sacred trust we have with the American people. And the communities you're describing, unlike the other military services that live on bases, we live in those communities, and so we're neighbors in those communities. We took an action to reduce the staffing and change the status temporarily several years ago because of a shortage in our enlisted workforce. I was at the Atlantic area, commanding Atlantic area, and I was part of the decision on where to take action to reduce the staffing at those stations. So I was responsible for that. And we are looking at those decisions to make sure we are not reducing search and rescue coverage in a way that unduly increases risk of response. But we are still assessing it. Senator, part of Force Design 2028 that the Secretary directed, one element is to look at our operating concepts and our force structure throughout the Coast Guard everywhere that we're located. And we're just beginning that work. And part of that will be an assessment on where our stations are and where our other facilities are located as well. So we haven't gotten deep into that work yet. And so I'm not ready to be able to commit that we won't close any stations. But there is a statutory process if the Coast Guard were to move forward with any closure of stations that includes public comment and input. And we know that the members of the public are very interested in the Coast Guard facilities and stations in their communities. So thank you, Senator.
And please keep me apprised. I know that our communities in Wisconsin that could be impacted by closures would be very eager to provide input. You heard from my colleague about the Port of Duluth. We call it the twin ports of Duluth and Superior.
Please correct the record, Mr. Chair.
And so we hope that if you visit Duluth, you will also visit Superior, Wisconsin. But I want to seriously focus, as my colleague did, on the existence of only one heavy Coast Guard icebreaker in the Great Lakes. There are certainly smaller icebreakers that are there, but when we're talking about early winter and late winter commerce, we have a need for an additional heavy icebreaker. I think about when we've had heavy ice in the Great Lakes, the negative impact on commerce. It can affect billions of dollars in commerce and tens of thousands of jobs in the Great Lake region. And over the last several years, I have advocated for both authorization of a second heavy Coast Guard icebreaker, but also funding to get that process moving. You know, there's a lot of discussion of recent investment in Coast Guard assets, but I have seen progress on the heavy icebreaker really slow at the very same time. And so if confirmed, will you commit to prioritizing this project so that the Great Lakes can be more accessible to commerce?
Senator, thank you. If confirmed by the Senate, I will commit to prioritizing the acquisition of a second Great Lakes icebreaker, given the importance in the Great Lakes.
I appreciate that very much. Finally, supporting strong Buy America standards is a top priority for me, especially when it comes to the areas under this committee's jurisdiction. Making sure that Coast Guard ships, their components, their equipment are produced in the United States guarantees that Coast Guardsmen are getting the absolute best products while providing well-paying jobs to Americans. I've been particularly concerned over the last several years with irregularities in Coast Guard procurement and have questioned whether the Coast Guard is fully adhering to Buy America requirements. So Admiral Lunde, if confirmed, will you commit to following all of the Buy America requirements for Coast Guard procurement in law?
Senator, thank you for the question. I will commit to complying with the law related to construction of Coast Guard cutters and assets in the United States. I would note that for the Arctic Security Cutter Program, the President, under the President's authority, made an announcement on the 9th of October about the construction, the need, national security need for construction of the first 4 of those overseas to be able to onshore the remaining program back into the United States in shipbuilding. But that was a specific action under the President's authority. The remainder of Coast Guard shipbuilding is conducted in Coast Guard shipyards, in United States shipyards for Coast Guard cutters.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, great to see you again. Appreciate our meeting yesterday. Congratulations. I want to congratulate, thank your wife, Linda Lee as well, the Master Chief of the Coast Guard who's here. I've appreciated you coming up to Alaska many times already. I'd love to see you more. We love our Coast Guard in Alaska. You know, I don't like bragging about Alaska, but I always do. So we have more coastline than the rest of the country combined. So the Coast Guard is really important.
Did you just say you don't like bragging about Alaska?
I do like bragging about Alaska, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you love hearing it. And by the way, I want to really thank, and this is Alaska, Texas issue, the rescue missions you've done in our recent, the typhoon in Alaska, the big floods in Texas, just heroic efforts. You and our National Guard, Coast Guard members saved 51 people in Alaska. Didn't make any news. You saved 51 lives. It's just unbelievable. Cruz operated in the middle of a typhoon, isolated, flooded communities, no infrastructure. It was just incredible. So can you please pass on my thanks, the committee's thanks for the great work you're doing?
I will, Senator. Thank you.
And when I
Mr.
thanked
Chairman.
them, I told them, look, it's never been a better time to be in the Coast Guard. The chairman and I work very closely with Secretary Noem and you, sir, on the budget reconciliation bill, the biggest investment in Coast Guard history, $25 billion. By the way, I just walked past the Senate Liaison Office, this giant sign of the Coast Guard outside your Senate Liaison Office, historic investment. That's what's happening. It's great. And part of that, Senator Cruz already talked about 16 icebreakers in the budget reconciliation bill. We need it. As you know, the number I actually have, the Russians have 54 icebreakers, many of which are nuclear-powered, weaponized. The Chinese, I think, have more heavies than we do. We have 2 heavies right now, and 1 is broken. So we got a lot of work to do. I want to thank President Trump, who has been very focused on closing this icebreaker gap, as we call it, in Alaska. But as you mentioned, the Russians and Chinese are all over my state in the Arctic. We've had 6 Russian incursions in our AIDAs since August. And as you mentioned, we had Chinese ships, quote unquote, doing research in the Arctic, also known as spying, in the Arctic, off the coast of Alaska all summer. So the Ice Pack event was a great event yesterday to essentially what we want, and I know you want, to build icebreakers and deploy them and home port them very quickly. Can I get your commitment to work with this committee on doing just that?
Mr. Chairman, if confirmed by the Senate, I will work with this committee to do that. Yes, sir.
And now in terms of home porting icebreakers, especially the heavies and the mediums, I can't imagine any scenario where you wouldn't home port icebreakers where the ice actually is and where our adversaries are. That hasn't always been the case, as you and I talked about yesterday. When I was the chair of the Coast Guard Subcommittee, I'm still the chair right now, when the Coast Guard a few years ago, you weren't involved with this, announced that it would home port all 3 heavy icebreakers in Seattle over 2,000 miles away from the ice, I learned about it in a press release, which I didn't like. So there was 0 consultation with me as the chairman of this committee. Can I get your commitment to, well, do you agree that was just unacceptable for the chairman of the Coast Guard Committee to learn about the home porting of icebreakers in a press release?
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't involved in
know
that,
you
but
weren't.
I think that it's important we consult with the committee.
Yeah, it was unacceptable. Let me ask to get your commitment to work with me and this committee on the home porting of the medium icebreakers and where we're going to home port those. Can I get your commitment to do that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And look, I know the Coast Guard is working on home porting plans right now. Is there any scenario in which a significant numbers of these medium icebreakers, we have a lot for the Great Lakes already, the heavies are going to go to Seattle, which again, I don't think makes a lot of sense, but whatever, you guys made that decision. But is there any scenario in which a significant number of these medium icebreakers would not be home stationed in the Arctic, in the state where the ice is, in the state where our adversaries are? And our adversaries are up in Alaska, in the Arctic a lot. Can you imagine any scenario where that would happen?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we haven't made any decisions on home porting yet. We look forward to working with you as the chair and as other members of Congress on that decision-making process. You and I were, and I want to thank you for being with us in August, along with the Deputy Secretary, to commission the first Coast Guard icebreaker, Storis, that will be home ported in Juneau. We're very excited about that.
Great. Well, look, again, I want to get your commitment. I already have it. Work closely with this committee. No blindsides for sure, as what happened on the heavies, which I didn't appreciate. But I appreciate your commitment there. Just one final question. We talked about yesterday the delivery and timeline for the 2 OPCs slated for Kodiak. Are they still expected to be holes number 3 and 4? Kodiak has the largest Coast Guard base in the country. Do you know what the timeline is on those, Admiral?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the exact timeline, but the 3rd and 4th OPCs that are delivered to the Coast Guard will go to be home ported in Kodiak.
Great. And I want to thank you again. I think you're extremely well qualified. We need to get you confirmed ASAP. There's so much work to do in the Coast Guard right now. It's a super exciting time to be in the Coast Guard. The Congress of the United States has said enough of this, as we talked about yesterday. Hey, the Coast Guard has this, which I think is admirable, but this ethos of, hey, we're going to do more with less. Well, if you got 50-year-old cutters and 60-year-old icebreakers, you can't do more with less. So we said, no, you're going to do more with more. And that's why this bill that we just passed is really exciting, and it's a great time to be in the Coast Guard, and I think you're going to be an exceptional leader, and we need to get you confirmed ASAP.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Admiral, thank you for coming before us, and thank you for your service to our country. I wanted to just get a little more clarity from you in terms of the protocols when it comes to interceptions of drug smuggling boats. So if you don't mind, can you walk me through, just as a Coast Guard is approaching a drug smuggling boat, what are the next steps that happen in terms of their protocol?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So typically, the Coast Guard is performing our drug interdiction mission as a maritime law enforcement, under our Maritime Law Enforcement Authority on the high seas, and whether that's in the Eastern Pacific or the Caribbean or other locations, but principally in those areas. We normally receive information. It could be from a surveillance aircraft or other means that there is a suspected drug smuggling boat that is headed north, and then we will interdict that boat. Sometimes we use an armed helicopter to disable the boat, and then we will go aboard, seize the boat, and typically take a representative or take the samples, the cocaine that's on the boat, if we can recover it. We'll destroy the boat as a hazard to navigation, and then we'll take the detainees who are operating the boat, and we'll process them, and then we'll take them to wherever they're going to go.
So arrest and then seek to prosecute. You said an armed helicopter. Is there a protocol for the Coast Guard to fire upon a ship with lethal force if unprovoked?
Our normal use of the Helicopter Interdiction Tactical Squadron, which are the helicopters, very specialized crews that do this work, and they are trained and they're effective at disabling the engines. The time they would use lethal force is if they were fired upon from the drug smuggling boat under our mode of operating as a law enforcement agency.
But without being provoked, does the Coast Guard have legal authority to destroy a boat or to kill the crew with lethal force if there has not been a provocation?
Well, Senator, we're operating out there under our Coast Guard Law Enforcement Authority as a law enforcement agency, a maritime law enforcement agency, and so that's not within our authority as a law enforcement agency during our Coast Guard operations under the Department of Homeland Security's authority.
In your tenure so far leading up to Coast Guard, has anyone from the Trump administration asked you if the Coast Guard is able to take action that would be against drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean?
Under our Coast Guard Law Enforcement Authority, we're continuing our maritime law enforcement operations both in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific.
Have they asked you whether or not you're able to use lethal force against these boats unprovoked?
No, Senator, I haven't had that discussion about the Coast Guard doing that as a maritime law enforcement agency.
Has the Coast Guard been asked to provide resources or assets to the current military buildup in the Caribbean?
Well, Senator, the Coast Guard is a proud member at all times of military service and part of the armed forces, the Joint Force, and we regularly provide our forces to operate under combatant commands around the world, including U.S. Cyber Command, Northern Command, Southern Command, Indo-Pacific Command. When they operate in that mode, they operate under the authority of the Secretary of War, the Department of War. And so for any of those military operations, I would refer you to the Department of War.
Okay, thank you. In terms of questions that came up earlier about the Indo-Pacific, Senator Wicker and others have asked, I guess I just wanted to ask you, are we doing enough in the Indo-Pacific when it comes to the Coast Guard actions?
Thank you, Senator, because the Indo-Pacific for the United States Coast Guard is not just an area somewhere over there. For us, that's the U.S. homeland as well, not only because of the state of Hawaii, but also our 3 U.S. territories in addition in the Pacific. And so that's the homeland. And so we have a responsibility to protect that border in the maritime approaches as well. I had the privilege of serving out in the Oceania District based in Hawaii from 2018 to 2020. And during my time, we added 9 additional cutters, permanently based Coast Guard cutters in the Indo-Pacific because of the importance of our operations there. And with the support of Congress in fiscal year 24, we have 2 additional fast response cutters that will be permanently based out there in Guam.
And do you think that that level of resourcing and additions is enough?
Well, it continues to move us in the right direction, but I don't know that it is enough, Senator. I think we need more support. In fact, in the President's fiscal year 26 budget request, there's a request for an additional significant investment in operating funds specifically for the Indo-Pacific to increase our operations out there.
Well, I hope to be able to work with you on that. I think it's incredibly important to make sure that we're maintaining and building up that capacity. Thank you,
Thank you,
Admiral.
Senator.
With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chairman. Admiral, congrats on your nomination. Look forward to our meeting tomorrow in the office. You know, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, it provided $24.6 million of investment in the Coast Guard. And this included $266 million in funds for long-range unmanned aircraft systems. So, Admiral, if confirmed, how will you use the new UAS assets to more effectively perform the Coast Guard's missions, especially in drug and migrant interdictions?
Senator, thank you for the question. So we are looking at what the spend plan will be, which assets we will purchase for the investment of long-range unmanned aerial systems. I think, as you know, we've operated for over a decade with Customs and Border Protection, part of a joint program office on the MQ-9 aircraft, but we're looking at other solutions as well. We're currently prototyping one off of San Diego that's proving very effective. It's a bit shorter range, it's a longer range, but it's not quite as long range as the MQ-9. So we're looking at different options to be able to move at speed and scale and deliver that capability.
Is that some sort of a clean sheet design, or is that an existing UAS?
It's an existing UAS, Senator.
Okay, understood. I had a recent informative, very good visit with the ALC, or the Aviation Logistics Center in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Very proud of what they do there. You know, that's the only depot-level aviation maintenance facility, as I understand it, in the Coast Guard. The One Big Beautiful Bill, it included $2.2 billion for depot level maintenance facilities, as well as $3.4 billion for new MH-60 helicopters and C-130J airplanes. How might these investments impact the ALC and the Coast Guard aviation fleet?
Thank you, Senator. Coast Guard aviation engineers are the best in the world, and our largest concentration of them is right there at Aviation Logistics Center in Eastern North Carolina, Elizabeth City. And so the investment in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, ALC, or the Logistics Center, will be key to that. First, we've already spent up to $80 million in the depot level maintenance line item to fund current readiness gaps. And that includes restocking the inventory control point of critical parts for our fixed and rotary wing aircraft, and that's located right there in Elizabeth City. But as we talk about the acquisition of up to 40 MH-60 helicopters and 6 C-130Js, the depot level maintenance, even some of the missionization that's required, and the support to that will happen right there in Elizabeth City at our location.
Very good, thank you. I want to talk about some of your disaster response a little bit. So Hurricane Helene devastated Western North Carolina, and we're still working on the recovery efforts there. But in the immediate aftermath of the storm, about 14 months ago, Coast Guard responded, and as I understand it, you all saved about 21 lives across the Southeast. So excellent work there. Can you talk a little bit about Coast Guard's disaster response capabilities, particularly when you're responding to something that's more of an inland disaster?
Yes, Senator, thank you. And it was very difficult to watch the devastating impact of Helene in Western North Carolina. So our inland flood response capabilities and disaster response capabilities are in a number of ways. First of all, we use our helicopters and air crews to be able to fly over inland areas, particularly where a state needs assistance. We have authority, Coast Guard authority, to be able to provide that assistance when requested. So a good example of that was the terrible flooding on the 4th of July last year in Central Texas, where we responded, as the Chairman, Cruz, said, and successfully rescued people. For our response in Helene, most of that, the rescues of the 21 were closer along the Gulf Coast, but we did have a helicopter that went up and supported the National Guard and their rescue efforts in Western North Carolina. We also operate small skiffs that are powered by an outboard motor that are used for inland flooding areas, and those are available in a rapidly deployable mode if requested for disaster response.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today and look forward to meeting soon. Chairman?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Lunde, we had a chance yesterday to talk about the I-5 bridge, which is 108 years old. And if it's not operational, would jeopardize $48 billion worth of freight and trucks over the bridge and barge that transport on the river. We discussed the fact that the Coast Guard needed to make a preliminary navigation clearance determination by January 16th or sooner. Will you commit to that deadline?
Senator, I commit to coming out with the updated navigation determination by that date.
Thank you. The seafood industry, Admiral, is incredibly important to us, 67,000 jobs. I've heard loud and clear from fishermen that protecting Coast Guard search and rescue is critical to their safety. That makes sense to you, correct? You already understand this mission. But do you have a plan to reopen the 23 search and rescue stations that were temporarily closed?
Ranking Member Cantwell, we don't have a plan to currently reopen them. That's part of the assessment that the Secretary has directed in Force Design 2028 to look at our operating posture of Coast Guard forces as we look at the operating concepts as well.
So what do I tell my fishermen? What do we tell the fishermen about whether the Coast Guard is going to be on the beat if they get in a drastic situation?
If there's someone in distress out at sea, Ranking Member Cantwell, the Coast Guard will respond to those that are in distress.
If the stations are closed and there's no resources close by?
Well, Ranking Member Cantwell, as we took actions to address that shortage in our personnel and through the Force Alignment Initiative, we were very deliberate to making sure we still had adequate coverage even across those areas where we were going to take a station that was seasonal and turn it into a forward operating location that wasn't fully manned constantly, crewed constantly, or we took a response station and changed it to scheduled mission only. So we were deliberate about the risk we were taking in those areas, so we minimized any impact on our ability to timely respond to mariners in
Well,
distress.
I'd like to go over in more detail that plan with you, since I represent a state with great coastline and great remoteness to getting to a situation very timely when you think about the Strait of Juan de Fuca or out on the Pacific. So I'll look forward to reviewing that with you. One of the other aspects of Coast Guard presence in the Northwest is the Cape disappointment, critical to our, important strategy for the region, but also for the Motor Lifeboat School, which is really very impressive. I think everybody thinks of the Kevin Costner movie where he rescues people, but that's exactly what we train people to do at Cape D. So we need a solution to new docks that accommodate replacement of 52s and a cutting-edge facility to support the workforce and training, and to help with critical infrastructure like protecting the rescue capacity at Oahu by doing dredging. So will you commit to those objectives?
Ranking Member Cantwell, I will. You know, the Coast Guard boat drivers are the best in the world, including there at Cape Disappointment where we train them. It's critically important. The Coast Guard is going to expend $110 million from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act to address the dredging issue that you described at Oahu.
Thank you.
Rather than the continual dredging challenges, we spoke about a more permanent solution, and so we're going to work for a design that will be able to do that effectively.
Well, I welcome you to visit that area of the state. I brought up in my opening statement, obviously, the challenges we faced about sexual assault and misconduct at the Academy. Do you support legislation that we passed out of this committee to improve Coast Guard oversight in response to sexual assault and misconduct, establishing an independent oversight, holding leaders accountable for misconduct, improving care for victims?
Ranking Member Cantwell, I commit to, if confirmed by the Senate, working on any activity that will make the Coast Guard better able to combat and eliminate sexual assault from our organization.
Would you approve a role of the Office of Chief Prosecutor? Because we've found that you have to have intended an oversight and independence for these sexual assault cases.
Ranking Member Cantwell, we currently have and have had since the changes to the National Defense Authorization and Military Justice Reform Act, we've had a flag officer who is our chief prosecutor in the Coast Guard who has the jurisdiction to prosecute those covered offenses, just as in the other military services, they have a special trial counsel. So we are already implementing that.
Okay, so a couple of other, so there were 33 recommendations outlined by the previous Commandant. So I assume that you will work on a timeline to complete those.
I will, Ranking Member Cantwell. We've completed 24 of the 33, and we're working to complete the remaining ones. I look forward to briefing you on those. When those are done, we will not be finished because we're going to keep taking aggressive action to combat and eliminate sexual assault. Not only care for the victims who are victims of this terrible and violent crime that is a cancer on our readiness, but also to make sure we have justice, that we investigate and prosecute those who commit these crimes and hold them fully accountable under the law.
Admiral, thank you for that very strong statement. Very, very much appreciate it. Two really quick things. There's some talk about tsunami warning systems being canceled. I would assume you really appreciate tsunami warning systems in the Coast Guard.
I wasn't aware of that, Ranking Member Cantwell, but we rely on tsunami warning because of the Coast Guard units around the Pacific Rim.
And then we had a chance to talk about fentanyl and the challenges facing us with fentanyl and the inter cooperation between federal and state and local agencies. Do you support those kind of efforts?
I do, Ranking Member Cantwell. On the 29th of January, I directed a focused effort to combat fentanyl trafficking that came from our discussion in the hearing on counter-drug last year before the committee. And so we have increased by over 41% our multi-agency strike force operations targeting fentanyl and precursor shipments in the commercial shipping in our ports. And that relies on a very strong relationship with state and local law enforcement, as well as other federal partners.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cantwell. Admiral, congratulations to you and your family, and thank you for the meeting yesterday as well as our past briefings. As a new member of the Senate, one of the greatest honors for me was to be named ranking member of the Coast Guard Maritime and Fisheries Subcommittee. I take great pride in this role and take it very seriously. As we discussed, I want to ensure that there is partnership and that we uphold the highest standards of integrity, professionalism, and accountability, and that we're fully committed to the well-being of our service members and their families. I also shared with you, concerns about the Coast Guard not being politicized, the termination of Admiral Fagan left a poor taste for many. The purchase of the 2 luxury jets I shared causes concerns, even though we know there are some challenges with the current planes that you have. And again, what I appreciated in the conversation was you focusing on making sure that you are mission ready, mission critical, you're apolitical, and that you're just here to serve the American people. And so hearing your vision was also very important to me as well. And I recently had the honor of visiting Sector Delaware Bay at the Indian River Inlet. And I was proud to meet some really incredible individuals who love what they're doing and really are making a difference. I got a chance to talk to them about some of the concerns and the challenges that they have as well. And one of the top priorities for me has been affordable housing. And for many of them, that is a huge challenge. And so I wanted to make sure I put that on the record and also just ask, what steps is the Coast Guard taking to ensure members assigned to high cost of living or high vacation rental markets can obtain safe, affordable housing in the communities they serve? Delaware, we're on that coast, excuse me, and it's really expensive. So.
Thank you, Ranking Member Blunt Rochester. First, I just want to make sure I had addressed something you said in the beginning of the question, the purchase of the 2 C-37 long-range command and control aircraft. Yeah. The Coast Guard operates as part of our fleet of fixed-wing military aircraft, long-range command and control aircraft. These are military aircraft that we use for command and control, secure, reliable, on-demand military transport and secure communications for the Secretary, the Deputy, and the senior leadership of the Coast Guard. So that is part of the operational fleet we've always operated, and that's what we're purchasing. But your question on?
Didn't you say they were actually, they have to be outfitted and refitted and retrofitted to make them military ready, correct?
Yes, Ranking Member. They require a missionization process to turn them into the military aircraft that we'll use them for. Okay. To your question on the housing, thank you for that question, because that's critical to taking care of our people. We have 3 key areas that we're focused on in improving access to available and affordable housing. The first one is making sure that the housing allowances accurately reflect the cost of living. So one way to do that is we've increased the number of critical housing areas. That enables, if there's not enough available housing in the market, it enables a Coast Guard person to have their family live elsewhere, and then they get the benefit of the higher housing allowance in the other location. Second way is improving Coast Guard leased housing that members can live in. And then the third way is building Coast Guard housing in a place like Kodiak, Alaska, where we just opened a new housing area where there's no other housing available.
And I know that there had been an inaugural nationwide housing satisfaction survey. Will you continue to do that, continue to have regular structured feedback so that you can hear from the members themselves and also tailor your housing policy and allotment resources?
We will, Ranking Member. The housing survey is very important. What's also really important is traveling around and meeting with the crews, and not just the crews. The Master Chief Post of the Coast Guard, and then Linda Lee will travel with me. She'll often hear from the family members, and they sometimes tell a different story than the everything's great story that the crew members tell me. And oftentimes, she'll hear about housing issues that she'll take right to me, and we'll take action on them.
Excellent. And lastly, I wanted to talk about supply chains. We talked a little bit about that. and our supply chain legislation. But as you know, the Coast Guard, especially the cyber protection teams, play an integral role in improving the resilience of the maritime transportation system and coastal infrastructure, which are key to our supply chains. Admiral, how will you leverage the Coast Guard's cybersecurity capabilities to protect our ports and supply chains, knowing that state actors like China or North Korea continue to evolve in this space? And we can follow up with what is your strategic vision for that as well as it pertains to supply chains.
Thank you, Ranking Member. So first, we're using our regulatory authority. We have new regulations out on cyber regulations to improve the cybersecurity of U.S. facilities and shipping. And so that's just gone into effect, and that's groundbreaking regulation that's going to improve the baseline standard of cybersecurity and hygiene. The second one that you mentioned is deploying our Coast Guard cyber protection teams. These are expert teams that under our authority are able to deploy on U.S. critical infrastructure to harden that infrastructure and make sure we are resilient in our supply chain. And then also that signals to potential adversaries that they will be unable to hold our critical infrastructure at risk, that it will be resilient and we'll be able to defend ourselves in cyberspace.
Thank you so much, and best of luck to you, Admiral.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service, sir. I've long worked closely with my colleagues, Senator Sullivan and Senator Wicker, on this committee to support the Commercial Fishing Occupational Safety Research and Training Program. This program is authorized through the annual Coast Guard bill and is administered through a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Health and Human Services. The program works with trusted local partners who understand the health and the safety needs of our commercial fishermen. Fishermen face major mental and physical burdens in their work, and services from the fishing safety program are proven to save lives. So Admiral Lunde, do you agree that fishing safety programs can help prevent catastrophes at sea?
Senator, I agree. They're very important to prevent us from having to go out on a search and rescue case. If we can, the best search and rescue case is one that never happens because of fishing safety programs like the one you described.
No, thank you. And if confirmed, would you support the ongoing implementation of the fishing safety program?
Senator, if confirmed, I look forward to working with you on advancing that program.
No, thank you. That's very helpful. Under the Deepwater Port Act, the Coast Guard jointly processes deepwater port license applications with the Maritime Administration. These deepwater ports are set up primarily to export massive amounts of fossil fuels. This raises prices for Americans at home and puts our health, ocean, and environment in peril just to boost profits for big oil and big gas. Under the most recent Coast Guard Authorization Act, the Coast Guard would transfer its authority to act as the lead agency on environmental reviews of deepwater ports to MARAD. Admiral Lunde, is it true that the Coast Guard has 50 years of expertise in understanding the construction, the operation, the environmental impacts of deepwater ports?
Senator, the Coast Guard has significant experience with deepwater ports, but MARAD owns the primary responsibility, including for managing the National Environmental Policy Act process. The Coast Guard's been supporting MARAD through that process, but essentially that is under their authority as MARAD.
Well, if the Coast Guard gives up its decades-long expertise and authority in this area, and it's then the understaffed Maritime Administration, especially as big oil and big gas are demanding more exports than ever, we need to actively strengthen MARAD's capabilities. They're not strong enough right now, and we're removing the Coast Guard from the equation in terms of ensuring that safety is, in fact, made given primacy. So I've introduced the No Spills Act to push MARAD to be more vigilant in its licensing activities to better protect the American public from spills and price spikes I think it's a mistake to remove 50 years of expertise from this process, especially as we're seeing expansion. It's only going to get more and more dangerous. We should have learned from Deepwater Horizon that these accidents can occur, and you need the smartest, most experienced people on the job. And by removing the Coast Guard and having an agency without the full level of personnel which they need, it's almost like we're putting this whole area into a regulatory black hole. And it's going to be very dangerous because we've seen from past experience how the oil and gas industry just continues to move forward because of their profits, regardless of the dangers that we see out on the open ocean. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Admiral, for your service.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Lunde, it's good to see you here today. Congratulations on your nomination, and certainly enjoyed the time we spent in my office. And I understand a number of my colleagues have already raised the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Was a big story in Michigan years ago, 50 years ago, and is one that people continue to remember. And it certainly reminds us of how dangerous Lake Superior can be. And the importance of the Coast Guard's critical prevention. Your search and rescue missions are vitally needed. And as you know, folks in Michigan love the Coast Guard. And you've been to the Coast Guard City there and have made many trips, as we talked about. And I also want to just reiterate, you've addressed this question a few times, but I want to just reiterate the concerns that I have about some permanent closures for Coast Guard units in the Great Lakes. My concern is primarily in Michigan, and we want to make sure that those are there because they provide a critical service. And I know there are going to be some operational adjustments that are going to be announced, but we are going to be anticipating some of those. But if you could talk a little bit about that and how you see the services being provided to Michiganders, particularly given the fact that, as we talked about in my office, you have experiencing record recruitment, which is certainly a hats off to the men and women in the Coast Guard, that folks want to be a part of a great service. But with those extra folks coming in, will that potentially lead to additional support for your facilities in the state of Michigan?
Senator, thank you for your question. And thank you for sharing in our meeting yesterday the letters from your constituents about their strong support for the Coast Guard. I was able to read those last night, and so I appreciate having that direct feedback from your constituents and our neighbors and the communities we live and work in Michigan. And you noted the strong recruiting success, and we have. We recruited more this year than any other time since 1991, and the caliber of those young men and women. We just sponsored a recruit class, Linda Lee, Master Chief Peters of the Coast Guard, and I, and the caliber of those young men and women is remarkable, the best I've ever seen.
Right.
You asked about our presence in Michigan going forward. So we took a step several years ago to reduce, because we had such a shortage, reduce our footprint and the operating status of several of those stations. That remains a temporary situation, but we are directed now in force design to assess our operating concept in our entire force structure everywhere the Coast Guard is located. We haven't gotten far into that analysis yet. We owe that recommendation and report to the Secretary, and we're just beginning that work. But an important part of that will be making sure we understand what the concerns of those in the communities and the Senate here and the rest of Congress are in terms of our facilities throughout the United States, especially in Michigan, per your question, Senator.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you referencing the letters, which I have brought. Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that I have these letters are entered into the record talking about concerns about manning at various locations throughout the state of Michigan.
Without objection.
Thank you. In our office meeting, Admiral, we talked about a variety of issues, including some of the visits to facilities in Michigan. And one I would like you to talk a little bit about is the Great Lakes Center for Oil Expertise and the concern about oil spills in the Great Lakes and the fact that we still need to learn a lot more about how we deal with oil in freshwater. There's a lot of knowledge regarding that for saltwater, but freshwater presents a unique set of challenges. And when you think about the Great Lakes providing drinking water to over 40 million people, that's particularly important. Could you share with the committee your takeaways from your visit to that center and how you believe it continues to really be involved in a critical mission?
Senator, thank you for asking, and thanks for the support to create that center and have it be, and its work and its mission that it's focused on. I was able to go up there when I was commanding Coast Guard Atlantic area. I went up in January of 2023 to visit the region and then also visit that center of expertise. And I learned the important work that they do there to understand the critical nature of the Great Lakes system, not only from a national security perspective and its northern border, but also what a potential oil spill or other environmental damage, such as invasive species, could create in the Great Lakes. And so the importance of that work informs our understanding of risk and then the ability to prevent activities that could cause that damage and then be ready to successfully respond to it, such as an oil spill.
Wonderful. Mr. Chairman, I have one brief question. May I be allowed to ask it? Admiral, Coast Guard personnel, including those in Michigan, have reported to me about some significant challenges in obtaining housing, particularly in areas of high demand for seasonal and vacation rentals, which we have along our lakes, and that certainly affects their ability to find affordable housing. Just a quick question, what actions do you plan to take to address some of the housing challenges facing Coast Guard personnel, specifically in Michigan and some of our high tourist areas with expensive real estate, but clearly it's a problem in other places around the country?
Thank you, Senator, because housing is critical to the readiness of our families and their ability to be ready to get the mission done. So one of the first things we did was we made sure that the information that feeds into the broader system that all the military services use to calculate our basic allowance for housing is accurate information. And so one of the things the Great Lakes District Commander at the time did several years ago was paid a company to gather that data that was more accurate, and then we could input that into the system so that it could more accurately reflect the outcome and the cost of housing. Another parallel effort is to designate additional critical housing areas that enable personnel, if there's an area where housing isn't available, enable those personnel to have their family, if necessary, in another area and then take advantage of that higher housing allowance for the other area. And then the other area we're looking at is expanded use of government leased housing, where the Coast Guard leases housing and then members come into the area, and rather than spending time and effort trying to find housing where it's not available, we already have a home or apartments or a block of homes that they can live in. But it is a challenge because our personnel don't typically live, with rare exception, on large bases, and there are none in Michigan.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate your attention to that and your focus. Thank you, Admiral, for that. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Lujan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Admiral, for years I've been pushing one administration after another to go after the cartels and drug trafficking. We all represent a lot of people who have lost their lives and others that are preyed upon. And I've also been after administrations to say that they should be going after financial institutions in a meaningful way that are suspected of laundering money for cartels. A lot of those folks, they just pay a fine. No one ever goes to jail. And it just becomes the cost of doing business. Something has to be done in this space. So any attention brought to stopping this nonsense, I appreciate. Now, with that, I have a lot of questions, and there's no clarity that I'm aware of that's been shared from the administration to members of Congress outside of maybe one small interaction that was available to a few members of the U.S. Senate in the area where Senator Kim, I think, asked you some questions about the military strikes on vessels in the Caribbean and the Pacific. I think 83 people have been killed to date, if I have the number correct, unless something happened from my walk over from where I was to where I am today. My question, Admiral, is yes or no, does the U.S. Coast Guard have a role in these military strikes on vessels in the Caribbean or Pacific?
Senator, thank you for the question. So under our Coast Guard Maritime Law Enforcement Authority, we're not involved in the Department of War's operations that you're describing. That's under the Department of War, Senator.
Yes or no, are you aware of the Department of, I'm still going to call it Department of Defense, is utilizing the U.S. Coast Guard's Title 14 law enforcement authorities to conduct these strikes?
Senator, I'm not aware of that at all.
Yes or no, as a lawyer and career Coast Guard officer, do you believe these strikes fall within U.S. and international law?
Well, Senator, those strikes you're describing are being carried out under the Department of War's authority, and so I'll defer to them for questions about the authority for that military activity.
You're the top person at the Coast Guard, aren't you, sir?
I'm the acting commandant. Yes, sir, that's correct.
You're also a lawyer?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
You're a career Coast Guard officer?
Yes, Senator.
Probably one of the most knowledgeable people serving in the Coast Guard today about all these activities. I'll ask the question one more time in case there might be an answer. Yes or no, as a lawyer and career Coast Guard officer, do you believe these strikes fall within U.S. and international law?
Senator, my focus as the acting commandant, and if confirmed, the future commandant, my focus is on our operations under Coast Guard Maritime Law Enforcement Authority, not the Department of War's operations. I will defer to the Department of War to answer the questions on their military activities that you're describing, sir.
Admiral, have you been pulled into any meetings around this?
I have not been involved in meetings regarding those military activities specifically, no, Senator.
The Secretary of Defense, as you referred to, the Secretary of War, Secretary Hegseth, has not had a conversation with you about these strikes?
I have not had a conversation with Secretary Hegseth about these strikes, no, Senator.
Is this Coast Guard responsibility in the Caribbean and the Pacific? You have responsibilities in this area?
We do, Senator. So the Coast Guard provides under our Maritime Law Enforcement Authority and our capabilities. We're continuing to execute the direction of the Secretary of Homeland Security for our traditional counter-drug mission under law enforcement authority. That's one of a series of instruments that are available to the President. And so we are continuing the activities under our authority and making record seizures of drugs. In fact, this morning, the Coast Guard cutter Stone is offloading in Florida a record amount of drugs, cocaine, that they seized in the Eastern Pacific as part of Operation Pacific Viper that the chairman described.
And this is the Coast Guard's mission?
That's a Coast Guard mission and operation.
I applaud you for that. Let's turn there. So I agree that the U.S. Coast Guard's efforts to interdict vessels has been effective. As you pointed out just this morning, but in 2025, the numbers I have is you disrupted over 402 metric tons of cocaine, an estimated value of $7.2 billion. I applaud that. Yes or no, do the Coast Guard's interdiction operations yield intelligence opportunities beyond the immediate outcomes of an individual mission?
Our interdiction operations, our maritime law enforcement operations do yield intelligence. Yes, they do, Senator.
Do interdiction efforts contribute to a stable global trade system and help prevent piracy and smuggling?
Our operations do, yes, sir.
Have they resulted in intelligence that can be used to dismantle networks and prosecute the individuals involved?
Yes, sir. Traditionally, over the years, we have gathered intelligence that is fed into the investigative cycle, and that work continues today with the interdictions that I've described this calendar year that we've conducted.
I appreciate that. It sounds like this is all in the mission of the Coast Guard. I'm just surprised that the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, they not even talk to you about this. That sounds disrespectful. That sounds irresponsible.
Senator, I would say...
I'm not asking a question, Admiral. I apologize, sir. I'm out of time. The Chairman's going to take it from me here in a second. I hope that gets corrected. I hope the Secretary appreciates your expertise, your service to our country, what you have achieved and what you have done, and is willing to pull you in. So, Mr. Secretary, if you're out there, if you're listening to this, give you the benefit of the doubt. If you've ignored the Admiral, give him a holler, pull him in, have a good conversation, and learn from this wise person. I yield back, sir.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Admiral Lunde, my final question is required of all nominees. If confirmed, do you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee to provide thorough and timely responses to the committee's requests and to appear before the committee when requested?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senators will have until the close of business on November 21st to submit questions for the record. The nominee will have until the close of business on November 24th to respond to those questions. That concludes today's hearing. The committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.